Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to discuss with you things that you did not learn in school. This will include reading, studying, and test taking skills. Oftentimes, as we get older and we've been out of school for a while, we have a tendency of forgetting these things. Also, for those of us who are just coming out of high school, this is a really good way to kind of brush up on things that we need to know when it comes to taking tests and reading and studying in your EMS classes. So how were you taught to read? That is the question. Were you taught to just read, skim through things, or were you taught to read for comprehension? There is a difference between the two. When we read, we think of reading a newspaper article where we're just trying to get the gist of the information being provided. However, reading for comprehension is a little different. We take the material, we break it into smaller chunks, and we try to process the information that we are given. When you're in class, one thing that you will never hear me say is, have you read your book? What you will hear me say is, have you studied the material that you are being tested on? And the reason I say that is because I want you to read for comprehension. Typically in an EMS class, you will know your assignments ahead of time. So therefore, you can take the material you have and use good time management skills to understand what you are reading and break it into smaller chunks. Now, some things, such as if you're reading a chapter on abdominal emergencies, you may be able to read larger portions before needing to take a break and kind of digest that. There are things such as anatomy and physiology and cardiology where you will need to take and do smaller chunks because there's a lot to digest in those things. The process of reading basically is that you're going to take those small chunks and you're going to take a short break afterwards, process it, take some notes, look over them, and make sure that you have a good idea of what you're reading. Sometimes shorter is better. Again, in those larger chapters, we want to break them down into smaller portions so that we can appropriately read them and that we can appropriately understand them. We don't want to get overwhelmed. This is why we break it into smaller chunks so that we can digest each section individually, make note cards, and do things that will help us to remember what we've read. So what's the difference between reading and studying? So again, reading, we just read through the chapter, we read through material, and we just kind of get the gist of things, the idea. One recommendation has always been that when you're doing your reading your chapters, that you read them first, and then you go back and you study and you make notes. Studying, things to study are, highlighted terms and things like that, which we will cover in the next slide. So what do you need to study? When you're studying your book, italicized words are important. Those are terms that you need to remember. Bold words are the same. These are typically words that you find with definitions and things of that nature where you will need to remember what's around those definitions. The chapter objectives that are at the beginning of your chapter, this will describe the content of the chapter and generally what it covers. There are, however, additional resources that you may use, such as book study aids, workbooks, things of that nature, reputable apps, and sites such as that you will find online. Typically, the more reputable apps and sites out there will be ones that you will have to provide some type of monetary contribution to obtain. Your fellow EMS providers, I will never, ever say that you should not use your fellow EMS providers. Just make sure that they're very competent in the subject matter. So some things that we need to do. Typically, I tell people that we all have some form of ADHD, so typically an hour max is how long we want to study before we take a little break. Find yourself a quiet place. I know many of us, including myself, we love music, and that's okay. But make sure you're in a quiet place where there are no distractions. Note cards are a great way to help you remember material. In the beginning of your process, your note cards will start off very simple, such as terms, and you will just put direct definitions. As you progress through your class, however, your note cards will expand. For example, when you begin your chapter on heart failure, you need to describe what are the signs and symptoms of heart failure and the interventions for that. As we all know, the tests that we take for our state level and national register exams are scenario based. They are not direct questions. So this is why it's important that we know the treatments and the signs and symptoms related to these illnesses. Doodle journals. You doodlers, you have an awesome power. You can create sketches which outline, for example, blood flow through the body or organ locations and things like that. It's important to make it your own. These mnemonics that we have, OPQRST, sample, things like that, didn't just come out of thin air. They came as a way for us to remember these things because they're important. So it's important that you make it your own, make your own mnemonics, make your own sayings, catchy phrases to help you remember material. So let's talk about taking the test. Many people out there suffer from test-taking anxiety. It is a proven fact that 1/3 of all class-taking individuals will suffer from some form of test-taking anxiety. This may be small, easily taken care of, or it could be to the extreme of needing medications prescribed by your physician. It really depends on the individual. So some things that can help you: arrive early. When you arrive on time or you arrive late, this makes you anxious. It also makes you underprepared. Remember, caffeine is not always a good thing. Caffeine can actually overstimulate you and cause you to not perform well on tests. This is actually a proven fact, and studies have shown that too much caffeine is never a good thing. Cramming does not work. Again, multiple studies show that cramming can actually make you not remember what you need to remember for the exam. Instead of caffeine, try water. Water is a great thing because, again, it keeps you hydrated, but it doesn't have the effects of caffeine. But remember, not too much, because if you have to go use the restroom, it can take your concentration away from the exam. Remember, plenty of chill and proper grub. We want to make sure that we get plenty of rest the night before. Schedule your test to where you're able to get plenty of rest. Don't do it when you're coming off shift or when you've had a busy day. Proper grub, meals that are appropriate for helping remember fiber, the old food pyramid. One thing that we neglect is the basic breathing exercises. This has actually been proven to help when it comes to relieving anxiety, especially when you're in the room and preparing to take the test. So it's important that you are as relaxed as possible. So do we change our answers? Most people will tell you never change your answers. However, I will say this: if you are taking a test and you answer a question, and then a few questions later you see a similar question and you realize that, hey, you know what, that question that I had before is similar to this one, and I got the answer wrong. That is the only time you change your answers. So remember that the only time you change your answers is when you're confident that you have the wrong answer. Any other time, keep it with what you have. Remember, the questions you have are not trick questions. They are to help you think critically. These questions are designed to help you become critical thinkers. This is why we have Bloom's taxonomy, which we will discuss in a later lecture. The questions have a purpose, and it's important that you understand that. So when you're reading these questions, understand that they're not trying to trick you. They're just trying to get you to think outside the box. So when it comes to reading that question, there is an art to it. Do not read the answers first. Please do not read those answers first, because it's going to trick your brain. What you want to do, however, is read each sentence individually in the question. And we're going to go through that process here shortly. And you want to read all the answers. No matter if you think you know the right answer or not, make sure you read all the answers. So let's do this question together. You arrive on scene to find a 14-year-old male leaning forward in a chair. This is the first sentence of this question. So the first thing you want to think about, okay, this is a pediatric patient. He is in a chair leaning forward. What are the potential causes of him leaning forward? Well, we think about, okay, is he altered? Does he have respiratory issues? Leaning forward, we kind of probably looked for the respiratory issues. He appears anxious, is drooling, and you hear high-pitched sounds when he inhales. Well, looking at this, it looks like this patient obviously has some type of stridor going on, which is for the upper airway. So we think about those illnesses that affect the upper airway in our older pediatric patients. His mother states he has a fever and has been complaining of a sore throat. So now the mother tells us, and we can kind of add on to what we had before, that he has a fever, so that's a sign of infection. He also has a sore throat, which also is a sign of irritation and swelling of the throat. So the last sentence ends with, what should you suspect? So here we know this patient is complaining of some type of upper airway issue. He has a fever, so that means it's a possibility of infection, and that he is a teenager. So this is the whole question together. You arrive on scene to find a 14-year-old male leaning forward in a chair. He appears anxious, is drooling, and you hear high-pitched sounds when he inhales. His mother states that he has a fever and has been complaining of a sore throat. What should you suspect? So we put it all together. So your choices are A, epiglottitis, B, croup, C, anaphylaxis, and D, asthma. So if you read one of those sentences individually, you should automatically have eliminated down to at least 2 answers. In best guess situations, it should be A or B. Now, knowing that this is an older pediatric patient and he has stridor and he has a fever, epiglottitis would actually be your correct answer. So how do we read the question? Read it for what it is. One thing that we see people do is they like to add to or take away. They say, what if this is going on? What if that is going on? The thing is, always remember, if it's not in the question, it doesn't apply. Read the question as it is. Do not rush. We say allow a minute per question. Not every question is going to take you a minute to answer. So on those more difficult questions, it's going to give you more time to answer. Remember that not everything is advanced life support. And the reason I say this is people who go in to take the advanced and the paramedic test typically like to think, oh, everything is going to be advanced life support. Well, that's not true. Most questions you answer will be at the basic level. Again, they're testing your critical thinking and not as much on those ALS skills. Always remember your ABCs. Every question you answer will revolve somewhat around the ABCs. For example, if they tell you that the patient's airway is open and patent, and they tell you that they're breathing 24 times per minute and their oxygen saturation is 94%, and they ask you what you're going to do, then you're going to focus on what answers revolve around breathing. Or if they say, for example, you have a patient who's fallen off a ladder, which of the following would you do first? Well, the first thing you're going to do, of course, is scene safety or BSI. Always remember, kids, keep it simple, silly. Okay, we want to make sure that we don't overanalyze these questions. Also, remember, the more time you spend on a question, the more time that gives you to overanalyze that question. So yes, take your time, but don't sit and focus on a question for too long because your mind will play tricks on you. And last, we will end with this. With confidence, you have won before you've started. And the reason I say this is because there's been a few studies out there that have shown that students who have a higher confidence rate in their test taking actually perform better on tests. So your confidence will help you increase your test scores, and it will help you perform better on these tests. If you go into a test with a negative attitude and you say, I'm going to fail this exam, most likely you will not do as well on the exam. I really hope this helps you. And I really hope that in some way this inspires you to have better study habits and to perform better. I hope each of you have a great day.